Yeah, so I'm Brittany Mangelson. Some people call me Pastor B, pastor of the Salt Lake congregation, and you're listening to Gospel Tangents.
The best source for Mormon history, science, and theology, and first daily Mormon history podcast. I am Rick Bennett. Of course, the big news this past week was the sale of the Kirtland Temple. We're not going to talk about that with Community of Christ pastor Brittany Mangelson because I did the interview before the sale was announced. And anyway, I know my Community of Christ friends are hurting, and a lot of them don't really want to talk about it too much. But we're going to talk to Pastor Brittany Mangelson here. She's the pastor in the Salt Lake congregation for the Community of Christ. And we're going to talk about the differences between a bishop and a pastor. So that'll be a lot of fun. We'll also talk about Brittany's conversion. She actually grew up LDS. So you won't want to miss this conversation. Check it out. Welcome to Gospel Tangents. I'm excited for Women's History Month to have a female pastor on the show. Could you go ahead and tell us who you are, and you're a pastor for what group?
Yeah, so I'm Brittany Mangelson, and I pastor the Salt Lake City congregation for Community of Christ.
Yeah, so we're excited. Your predecessor, Carla Long, said that she was the first pregnant bishop in Utah.
Yes, I cannot say that happily. I'm very happy that I cannot claim that title.
So, and I guess that's interesting because in the LDS church, the bishop and pastor have merged roles, but in Community of Christ, that's not true, right?
Correct.
So talk about the difference between a pastor and a bishop in the Community of Christ.
Yeah, so in Community of Christ, it's actually pretty not common at all for a bishop to be pastor.
But Carla was.
But Carla was. That was a very rare exception, so I've been told. Bishops in Community of Christ are over financial stewardship, and so you need those skills to run a congregation, but we really try to split the pastoral roles with the money roles, whereas in the LDS church, those have been combined into one. So it's actually, I might even say, a little controversial for a bishop to also be a pastor because the kind of checks and balances of those two roles and positions are pretty important for Community of Christ, to not have somebody in charge of the money and in charge of the spiritual stewardship of a congregation. But every congregation has a financial officer who doesn't necessarily need to be a bishop.
Pastor.
Or a pastor. Yes, exactly. So the financial officer and the pastor are always separate roles. It just kind of was hilarious that Carla was also a pastor while being a bishop, but her priesthood office was bishop, and then her functional role was pastor. So It's a little confusing.
Well, and as I understand it, a bishop is over more than one congregation. Is that right?
Yeah. So there's usually a bishop that's over, a larger geographical area, a field, if you will, and just helps with a lot of budgets on the wider scale. So Carla was the bishop of the entire European field before she came to Salt Lake. So she still held that priesthood office, but her functional assignment had changed. But it's not like they yanked her bishop card away from her. Like, she still was a bishop, but
once
also...
a bishop, always a bishop.
Yeah.
Well, and now she's in the presiding bishopric.
She is, yeah.
So I was bummed. I should have got her while she was still here in Salt Lake, but I'll head to Independence.
Yeah.
So, and plus she's a math major. I'm a math major. We got along well.
It's true. I should not be a bishop because I'm terrible with math. And so I'm like, I will leave that to the numbers people. So, yeah.
So you don't have any dealings with finances at all?
No. Yeah. So as a pastor, everything has to go through my financial officer. So I, do have some say in the budget, just like anyone in my congregation, but I'm not the one that's writing checks or making final decisions on money. So we have a financial officer that figures all of that out and keeps track of the budget and where we're at. And I have to go through her to get permission to essentially spend money. I mean, I have like a little, pastor nest egg if people need flowers because someone died, or we have a baby that's about to be born in the congregation. So we'll be giving, the family a gift, and I can just go out and purchase a baby gift, but I don't have full reign of the checkbook. So, which I appreciate because, again, numbers are not my strong suit.
Well, very cool. So one of the interesting things for me learning about Community of Christ, when I started my podcast, I think I knew John Hamer and that was it. And now I know so many people. Mm-hmm. It's really cool. But you have what they call a temple school in order to become a pastor. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So every person who is ordained in Community of Christ has to take at least 3 classes. And this would be like a basic class on how we view scripture in Community of Christ, a basic class on priesthood ministry in general, and then whichever office you're being called to, there is a class for that. So if you're being called to teacher, priest, deacon, name an office, and there's a temple school class. Actually, I've heard that there's not one for like an apostle, which I've heard some of our apostles joke about of like, wait, where's our temple school class? But yeah, so there's training. And then there is a class to take just on the functions and duties of a pastor. So I've actually taken that class twice. I think I've taken it twice, but I took it a while ago. Just to kind of figure out what it would take to lead a congregation. And I've served on various pastorate teams under 3 different pastors. And so
like a counselor and a bishop?
Yeah. So I served under Seth Bryant, Blair White, and Carla before I became pastor.
With Seth Bryant, was he here in Salt Lake?
He was, yeah.
Was he the pastor?
He was, yeah.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, he was the second pastor I had in Community of Christ, but the first pastor that I served with as one of his counselors. So, yeah, it was fun when he was here.
Oh, because the last time I saw Seth, he was guiding at the Kirtland Temple. Mm-hmm. I didn't know that he had been a pastor.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, back in 2015. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, you've been in here a while. I guess we should let people know you are former LDS.
I am. Spoiler alert.
So you can talk both lingos quite well.
Yeah, I try to at least, but yeah.
I know there was an article in the Salt Lake Tribune a year or 2 ago.
Yes.
And they made a big deal about you being the first former LDS, now Community of Christ pastor here in Salt Lake. Can you talk a little bit more about that article?
Yeah. And, I've been around Community of Christ for a decade. So like I said, Seth was pastor and he's technically former LDS. So I think the caveat of that, was the first woman, former Mormon pastor. But yeah, I actually was sent to the Salt Lake Tribune from a friend of the congregation. A seeker reached out to one of her contacts. And
a seeker is what LDS would call an investigator.
Correct. Yeah. Yes. So yeah, they contacted me and they just wanted to see if I would share my story a little bit and just kind of some demographic questions about the congregation. And I definitely have a lot of podcasting experience and interview experiences, but my face being in the newspaper or being on video are new things for me. So I kind of do like to be behind the scenes a little bit and have my voice heard, but maybe in less public ways. So
you can't be behind the scenes as a pastor.
I know. It's but if you notice, Carla, she had, a lot of YouTube videos where she was giving these really great sermons. And I was just like, I can't fill those shoes. I'm way too, I'm a little bit more shy, I would say.
Now, I don't know if that's true because you did have a podcast called Project Zion.
Yeah.
Tell us about that too.
Yeah. So Project Zion is still a thing. It's still going. I have stepped back since stepping into this new role. I really had to take a few things off my plate. And unfortunately, Project Zion was one of those things. But the beautiful thing about Project Zion is that it's audio only. So I could just roll up, with my hair crazy and sweatpants, and it was there was a lot of behind the scenes that folks didn't necessarily see. So I'm happy to be here and have my face, but it on camera, but it's just not. I'm not like itching for these opportunities. I'm a little more reserved, but so Project Zion, it's Community of Christ's most official podcast, and we talk theology, we talk church culture. There's a whole series of fair trade where folks from different denominations, primarily LDS, but we do have some that are from other denominations converting to Community of Christ. So they just share their faith stories, and it's a lot of fun.
Well, very cool. So it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, the Salt Lake congregation was a pretty small congregation, but then the 2015 policy came out. A lot of LDS people were upset because the LDS Church wouldn't allow blessings of children of gays or ordinations or baptisms and things like that. And so a lot of people left the LDS Church and really gave a shot in the arm to Community of Christ, especially the Salt Lake congregation. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was definitely one of the big dominoes that fell. A little bit before that, I think the ordained women movement and kind of how the LDS Church responded to that was another one of those big kind of watershed moments that caused people to leave and at least just check us out a little bit. Two of the women on my pastorate leadership team were founding board members of the ordained women movement. So they started coming to Community of Christ, or at least quietly checking us out online right around that time. But yeah, the November 2015 policy was huge. Another one of my pastorate members, that's what caused him to leave the LDS Church and, officially say, I need a break and let's look at what other options are out there. It's really tricky because I don't love it when the LDS Church makes really harmful decisions, right? Like I would rather them not alienate their members. But I do feel really confident and good that the Salt Lake congregation stands as a place where we can be a refuge for people who feel like they can no longer stay in their spiritual home. So I don't celebrate that. It's really terrible and hard when you feel so alienated from your community. But most of us in the Salt Lake congregation have been there in one way or another. So we're there ready to take people in as they come. And that has actually been a really beautiful thing to witness, because you see the evolution of people who feel so harmed and hurt by religion, and then healing themselves and then turning around and being that welcome invitation for other people who come in. So it's really this bittersweet moment. And yeah, I wish everyone could just get along and not be mean to each other, which sounds like so Pollyanna, but it's hard. It's really difficult when, folks come and they feel very alienated and hurt by religion. And we just try to be there to be a loving, open response.
Mm-hmm. So you said you had been associated with Community of Christ about a decade, and that was about 2015.
Yep.
So was that kind of the last nail or the last straw for you?
Well, actually, no. So for me, it was ordained women. And my husband and I, we had been on a faith journey. I'm comfortable with the word crisis. For me, it really did feel like a crisis, just kind of like the bottom falling out from under me. That had been going on for about a year. So all of probably the last half of 2013 into 2014. And I had been quietly following the ordained women movement. I wasn't super vocal about it on Facebook. I was not brave enough to show up to the actions. But my friends were, and I was watching how the church responded, and not just church leadership, but the body of the church, right? And these were my friends, and I saw them just get ripped to shreds. And I had just had my son. I had I did not have newborn twins. I had a newborn son and 3-year-old twins that were little girls, and I just didn't know how I was going to raise girls in this community when I saw my friends just be torn apart, just for asking questions. And I think that at this point, sometimes we forget that the women who started Ordained Women were like Relief Society teachers and in Relief Society presidencies. I mean, they were good faithful. They still are good and faithful, but especially at the time, right? They weren't disbelieving LDS members. And so that really rattled me. And seeing Kate Kelly get excommunicated, seeing John Dehlin get called in, and seeing also kind of the discrepancies of how those two situations were handled.
Where John got a 6-month reprieve.
Yeah. And Kate was just like, right at the beginning, you know, and it was very jarring for me. And I had just had a baby, so my hormones were everywhere. And I was like, I just want to be accepted. And I mean, I had a very real moment where I thought if I were brave enough, if I were as brave as my friends who are saying these things publicly, I would be excommunicated too. And that's a really scary realization to come to. So I took a break, and my husband was okay with that because he was on his own faith crisis journey. So collectively we had decided, okay, we're going to take a pause. And he had been looking at Community of Christ through John Hamer primarily. And so he was like, I think you'd really like it. And I was just like, we are Mormon, and if we're not, then we're not going to be anything. But he talked me into going to a family camp, kind of like a ward camp out, but it's much bigger, a geographical area.
Yeah, camping's big in Community of Christ. It
is, yeah. So I went with a 3-month-old and toddler twins, and I fell in love with it. And I fell in love with the people. That's where I first met Seth Bryant and his family. And just hearing the story of Community of Christ collectively, as a whole, going through their own faith transition, I was like, oh, they're doing what I'm doing. But like they did what I'm doing as a denomination, and I appreciate where they ended up. So then I kind of backtracked and figured out how Community of Christ got to where they are today. And I just fell in love. And so we kind of sent a soft email out to our bishop, just of like, we're taking a break, and, you know, we might be back. We know where you're at if we decide to come back. And here I am. We never went back.
So what was the response from your bishop?
I mean, it was complicated, right? He was our next door neighbor, and I'm still friends with his wife. So it was tricky.
And now you're the bishop, sort of.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, it's sometimes I'm like, what is my life? I did not plan for literally any of this. But yeah, I mean, he was respectful. And I mean, we had been in communication about our faith transition for a while, so it didn't come as a surprise. You know, he was sad, and our ward was really sad. Josh and I were both really involved. And so I think it came to a shock to a lot of people. But I don't think our bishop was surprised. And we ended up resigning our membership because we didn't want to, you know, push him to excommunicate us. And it just was like, we don't want this to be a fight. We don't want this to be awkward. Like, we've just moved on. So let's just move on. So yeah, after we joined Community of Christ, we ended up resigning our membership. So, and it was a bittersweet thing, right? I mean, I have been through, you know, an angry ex-Mormon period where as I think everyone does, but mine was not very long-lived. It was pretty short-lived. And I mean, I think joining a church that still claims restoration roots, you kind of have to get over that anger pretty fast and find nuance and find hope in the story. So I do feel I don't have a lot of regrets about how it all happened, but it still was a really emotionally charged experience, obviously, and I didn't see it coming until it was staring me right in the face, and Josh and I kind of held hands and jumped off the cliff together, and it worked out. And I do feel really lucky that it worked out, because I know that these kinds of things can tear marriages apart, right? So I do feel really lucky that my spouse and I have been pretty much on the same page the whole time. And, you know, we're in kind of theologically different places now, but we're both super chill about it and respectful of each other. And we've somehow made it work. So.
Oh, now that's interesting. I want to explore that if that's okay.
Yeah.
So you said that Josh, well, I did ask Josh if he wanted to be on, and he didn't want to be on. So I hope he's okay with us talking about him. But Was ordained women a big deal for him, or did he have other issues?
Yeah, so for him, his primary concerns were historicity of the Book of Mormon, the church history side of it, right? So the story of the first vision and, there actually was a reason why Joseph was thrown into Liberty Jail in Carthage. And those realizations were really jarring for him.
And we should mention he's the one who started the Mormon Historians Facebook group.
Yeah, to kind of unpack some of that history, right? And so for him, his big push was history. I was really concerned about those things as well, but I got to the point, and I think he did too, got to the point where, okay, so if the LDS church isn't the one and only true church, maybe it can still be good, and it can be a good framework to raise kids in. And to be clear, I still believe that. I still believe that there's a lot of good that comes from the LDS church, and I would never advocate for someone to leave it unless they wanted to, right? But for Josh, seeing me kind of go through my breakdown of women's equality and queer inclusion and recognizing that I needed a space that those things existed, he hopped on board pretty quickly. I mean, I did the whole, imagine being a little boy and sitting in conference and every talk is about Heavenly Mother and every talk is given, but 2 are given by women and all of your leaders are women and you can't access God unless it's through a woman, right? How would that have made you feel as a little boy? Would you have felt loved and cared for and important and utilized? And that kind of that reversal kind of hit him pretty hard. And he's like, oh yeah, you're right. And then he started really seeing some of the issues that I had. And we jumped off the cliff together.
Wow. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Pastor Brittany Mangelson from the Community of Christ. In our next conversation, we're going to talk about the baptism policy in the Community of Christ, as well as priesthood ordination. I guess you don't have to get baptized because Community of Christ recognizes pretty much all other baptisms as long as the person was at least 8.
Correct. Yeah. Baptism, 8 years old, having water, a Christian baptism. So yeah.
So sprinkling's still okay.
I mean, I think so. If it happened after 8, I think the criteria are 8 years old, water, and a Christian baptism.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you to continue to enjoy Gospel Tangents. Consider becoming a Patreon or go to gospeltangents.com/shop, and you can get a cool tie, a hat, or even a nice mug. You can also get a sweatshirt, so check it out at gospeltangents.com/shop.